Well, welcome to the second panel of our public program today. Thanks to Bill and Dustin for a entertaining and lively and informative fireside chat. Thanks also to Dr. Skinner and especially Dean Peterson for hosting us on this beautiful campus. Thanks to Dr. Skinner for her leadership in organizing this conference. Thanks to everyone who flew out to participate in our day of closed-door roundtable discussions yesterday. It was a fascinating day of discussions. We brought together a cross-section of experts from the U.S. government, from industry, current serving government officials, retired officials, and it really brought home, frankly, the staggering scope of the cybersecurity challenges we confront here in the U.S. And all of the challenges that we confront, we've also learned, are being confronted by our Quad partners in many other countries around the world. And it is important, I think, not only that we talk to each other, but to our partners to learn what they're facing, to share intelligence, to share best practices, to share knowledge about these cybersecurity threats. And frankly, to learn from our Quad partners. You know, one of the common themes of the discussion yesterday was the cybersecurity threats we face from China. And it's worth noting, as Dustin did, that our Quad partners have been leading on some of these key issues. It was Australia that first stepped up to the plate and banned Huawei from operating in their 5G networks. Eventually, the U.S. government came around to the idea that we also needed to do the same thing, and many other countries followed, but it was Australia that first paved the way under great pressure from the CCP. It was India that first stepped up to the plate and identified TikTok as a threat to its internal security, as an espionage threat, and banned not only TikTok, but hundreds of Chinese apps from operating in their ecosystem. Again, under pressure, coercive threat from the CCP, and India and Australia made the decision that our national security was more important. China was a common theme in our discussions yesterday and probably will be again today. And why is that? Is it because we're all members of the military-industrial complex? Is it because we want to sustain U.S. hegemony? Is it because we're racist toward the Chinese, or we're propagating threat inflation? Or is it because they pose a legitimate threat? Well, in my opinion, it's quite obvious it's the latter. And it's not just the U.S. that has come to this conclusion. When we talk to our friends around the world, they all say the same thing. Most of our cybersecurity threats right now are coming from China. This is not a partisan issue either. The Biden administration's Justice Department has said the Chinese government steals staggering volumes of information and causes deep job-destroying damage across a wide range of industries. So much so that we're constantly opening new cases to counter their intelligence operations, a new case every 10 to 12 hours. Here in the US, they unleash a massive, sophisticated hacking program that is bigger than those of every other major nation combined. And it's fairly straightforward and fact-based. There are 2,000 active investigations into Chinese government attempts to steal information and technology in the U.S. And as we heard before, even conservative estimates suggest they have stolen trillions of dollars in U.S. intellectual property in recent years. The Chinese counterintelligence threat is more deep, more diverse, more vexing, more challenging, more comprehensive, and more concerning than anything else I can think of, said the former FBI director. But it is beyond China. China is not the only counterintelligence threat and cybersecurity threat we face. As we heard yesterday, there is a broad spectrum of cybersecurity concerns, and I think we have assembled a great group today to discuss those concerns. We at Heritage find this quad grouping of the United States, Australia, Japan, and India to be a particularly important multilateral forum, one that we have been promoting since before the Quad was reconstituted in 2017. And we've been convening forums like this every year since 2014 to try to promote cooperation among our Quad partners and to hear from them and learn from them. And so it was very important to us to have great representation from the Quad countries today. And so we will get to hear from our Australian counterpart, Patrick Hallinan, who was a minister counselor at the U.S. Embassy in Washington currently, and formerly the Deputy National Counter Foreign Interference Coordinator in Australia. He also served as a senior advisor for espionage and cybersecurity for the Australian Prime Minister between 2011 and 2013. Miho Matsubara is the Chief Cybersecurity Strategist at the NTT Corporation. She was part of the Japanese government Cybersecurity R&D Policy Committee. She's held affiliations with Pacific Forum Hawaii, IISS, and wrote an award-winning book on cybersecurity. Dr. Gulshan Rai from India was India's first national cybersecurity coordinator. He was instrumental in drafting the Information Technology Act of 2000 in India, played a role in framing the national cybersecurity policy of 2013, and currently holds an affiliation with the Vivekananda International Foundation, which is an Indian partner think tank that we work with quite frequently. And lastly, we have Vice Admiral T.J. White to represent the United States side. He's had a distinguished career with the U.S. Navy, was commander of U.S. Fleet Cyber Command for 10th Fleet and Space Command. He was the commander of the U.S. Cyber National Mission Force Cyber Command, the director of intelligence at Indo-Pacific, and currently a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. And so we are going to move to a panel format. I've asked each discussant to speak for about 10 minutes, and we want to leave plenty of time at the end for Q&A and an interactive discussion with the rest of the audience. So thank you all for coming out today. Thank you to the speakers. And Dr. Rai, I think we'll kick things off with you.
Thank you, Jeff. I would like to express my gratitude to Heritage Foundation and the University of Pepperdine for inviting us and having us among such an august audience there. Thanks very much. As you all know, India, like many other nations, also entered the new phase of globalization there. And like other countries also, we are striving very hard to penetrate the technology into our day-to-day life there. We are striving very hard to build resilient kind of systems and maintain the resiliency in cyber infrastructure, sustaining the development and all kind of issues there. Now, in this scenario, our technology penetration is almost 25% of the entire GDP of the country, and we hope we will achieve by the next couple of years, we'll be crossing 32%, 33% kind of a digital kind of economy in the country. This whole kind of a technology implementation has also brought a lot of challenges because this is a disruptive kind of a technology. Whatever we did it in the last 10 years, now with the new emerging technology, disruption is coming there and disruptive kind of systems are coming there. India has the advantage that we don't have a legacy system like US and many other G7 countries there. But there are issues today, a power plant or a bank or any other institutions look like embedded systems there. That's a scenario there. And they're all loosely coupled or tightly coupled systems are there. Any kind of a issue in anywhere, it creates a kind of a systems in the entire chain of the systems there. So these issues of the cybersecurity has become very, very important in an Indian scenario there. Last year we had about 1 million kind of incident, or the lesser intensity or more intensity. We have a framework of systems there which try to resolve the cyber incidents there, and we are trying to regularly update those and regulate the system there. However, this is a system where India alone cannot do that. It has to be dependent upon the global systems or the the countries to seek a cooperation and to see the addressing the issues and challenges which we face there. While we have number of cooperations with different countries there, but one of our northern border country, we had a 40% kind of on an average we get a 40% kind of a cyber incident faced for them. And number of incidents where the money was taken out from the banks there. You tell them that this is a phishing incident. Hardly there is any way to reach to them to address their phishing incident or such kind of issues. That is a scenario, and this scenario in a heterogeneous environment will become more and more there. Now, I think we need to find a solution, and I think Quad is the best kind of a framework there. The two of the Quad members are a member of the G7 countries. They account for more than 40% of the economy of the entire world there. That's the power of the Quad has there. And I think we need to evolve a system. Normally when we go, in a multilateral system, it becomes very difficult to evolve a framework. Today the framework will be a global framework. Because we are in a globalization kind of world, so we need to have a global framework to address our challenges also. In a multilateral environment, it takes a lot of time. That's why we go in a bilateral kind of a system there. The Quad offers a kind of a very convenient system. It's a multilateral, it's a bilateral also, the 4 countries are there. And I think it's a wonderful platform, it's a forum there, and all the countries are like-minded democratic countries. We have to find a solution, and that solution will be a kind of a path for the rest of the world, because we can bring other like-minded countries from the Europe, and that's what I think India strive to work with the Quad to bring some sort of a reasonable balance to enhance the resiliency of our cyber infrastructure, not only India, but rest of the world, particularly in Quad countries. Thank you.
Sure. Good morning. Are you awake? Aren't you excited about talking about cybersecurity for Quad? Sure, great. So thank you so much, Dr. Rai, to talk about an Indian perspectives. I'd like to talk about a little bit about the overview of the status of collaboration amongst the Quad members on cybersecurity first, and then I'd like to talk about 2 areas of collaboration on cybersecurity between the Quad members. So first, the Quad Leaders Summit back in September 2021 agreed to build quality infrastructure in the Indo-Pacific. So it's in general not only about cybersecurity. However, they also agreed to launch a Quad senior cyber groups to build a workforce and talent, and also to promote scalability and cybersecurity of secure and trustworthy digital infrastructure. So I think that they already meant and committed to build the protection of critical infrastructure by cyber means. So this is a great start. And Quad Senior Cyber Group had a meeting in Sydney in March 2022, almost 1 year ago, to extend our cyber collaboration and also to uplift our cyber resilience and critical infrastructure protection in the Indo-Pacific region. So I think that we really need to build a resiliency for our critical infrastructure in the Indo-Pacific, not only for the Quad members. So I'd like to propose 2 areas of collaboration. One is ransomware attacks, counter to ransomware attacks, and also to multi-domain operations, including cyber. So ransomware attacks are the real threat. And ransomware attacks that attack in critical infrastructure facilities around the globe. And they attacked actually Children's Hospital in Canada in December 2022. So that is the most vulnerable facility in anywhere in the world. It's terrible. And also they attacked Royal Mail Services in the UK in January 2022. So it was quite recent, and they had to suspend the delivery of the mail services. So, and also the Colonial Pipeline here in the United States back in May 2021 showcased that even a financially motivated cybercrime against one company can lead to an economic security or even national security crisis through the supply chain attack. So I'd like to share the statistics by the proof point in 2021. So 50% of Japanese companies got hit by ransomware attacks or ransomware attack in 2021. 50%. So that's a huge number. And the ratio was 80% in Australia and 72% in the United States. And I don't know the reason why, but the proof point didn't do the survey in India. But reportedly, 70% of Indian companies hit by ransomware attacks over the last 3 years. So about 50 to 70% or 80% of companies in the Quad members got hit by ransomware attacks. So that's a real problem. And another problem I see is the payment of ransomware. So 20% of victimized Japanese companies actually paid a ransom to cyber criminals. And the ratio was actually 80% in Australia and 64% in the United States. So we really need to educate we really need to educate companies not to pay a ransom, and also to provide cybersecurity assistance so that they can protect themselves from ransomware attacks. And it is really commendable that the United States already launched an annual 30-country meetings to address ransomware attacks in 2021, inviting the Quad members as well. And given the urgency of the challenges caused by ransomware attacks, I think it makes sense for the Quad members to also talk about ransomware attacks and also to share cybersecurity intelligence focusing on ransomware attacks and also to share best practices. And second, now we've already talked about the lessons learned from the ongoing war in Ukraine, and we just had a wonderful fireside chat between Dustin and Mr. Bill Vanina. And I think one of the lessons learned we are learning from the ongoing war in Ukraine is the importance to address multi-domain operations, including cyber and space. And I think that what the Quad members need to do is to include cyber elements and also multi-domain operational capabilities into our joint military exercises to counter the similar types of threats like caused by the ongoing war in Ukraine. And I think that we already have a model to follow, because Japan and the United States already did Kingsword and Yamasakura military exercise covering the multi-domains in November to December 2022. So what we can do is just to expand these wonderful models to cover the Quad members, and so that we can not only to build the resiliency in the protection of critical infrastructure, but we can also raise the resiliency in the different domains. So we already made a wonderful progresses in the Quad collaboration on cybersecurity, and I really look forward to working with you more closely on this important issue and opportunities for cybersecurity. Thank you.
Thank you, Miho, Dr. Ryan, Jeff. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. I'm just going to start with a couple of remarks about Australia and its approach to cybersecurity, and I'll sort of turn to where we see value from the Quad. Look, first and foremost, cybersecurity is something that is very much at the forefront of the sort of strategic environment in which we confront in the Australian context. It's been an area of significant focus now for governments of both political persuasions over the last 10 years in particular, but with a significant escalation in focus in the last few years. To illustrate that point, in 2016, the former government published a cybersecurity strategy. It formed a view that by 2020 it was necessary to update that cybersecurity strategy. And we're now, with a new government, we had a change in May last year, developing a similar timeframe to the US, to Chris Inglis, the Office of National Cyber Director here, a new strategy again. The plan there would be, it would have a lifespan of 2023 to 2030, and really seek to uplift across the whole of the economy cyber resilience. There's a couple of reasons for that. The first is that we are witnessing and experiencing cyber attacks on a sort of at a rate that we simply have not experienced before. We probably had two of the most significant cyber compromises in the back half of last year, driven primarily by ransomware. So Optus, which is the second largest telecommunications provider in Australia, was breached, and the personal sort of data of roughly 2.1 million Australians was compromised. That was followed up pretty shortly thereafter by another hack of Medibank Private, one of our bigger private medical insurers. They've been quite meaningful and consequential in terms of raising awareness within the Australian society of the reality of this, particularly Optus. So, for example, my wife's personal data was hoovered up. The secretary of my department, I think, was impacted personally by the Medibank Private hack. The rubber is very much hitting the road for regular Australians. So what have we been doing? And the short answer is a lot. So in addition to having the strategy, the former government announced a substantial investment, in fact a doubling of resourcing for our Australian Signals Directorate. That's our NSA equivalent. Last year the new government has backed that budget in, and we'll see it through. That represents an investment of an additional $10 billion, which is not small change in our system, in our Signals Directorate. Our Signals Directorate provides also the Australian Cybersecurity Centre. That is the principal body within the Australian system, if you'd like, that provides practical and active support to Australian business, Australian individuals that are affected by cyber attacks. We've done a lot of other reforms in related fields, and these are areas which are directly relevant to the focus of the Quad. The former government in 2018 created a Security of Critical Infrastructure Act, which put a series of obligations on the owners and operators of critical infrastructure within Australia to sort of meet certain security standards, and cyber was part of that. In 2021, the government, in light of this sort of the lived reality of the threat environment that we confront, took forward further reforms. Those reforms expanded the sectors of critical infrastructure that we'd identified from 4 to 11. So we went from your sort of traditional, and Bill made some comments earlier today about starting perhaps in the US system, looking at the energy sector. We looked at things like water, ports, electricity and gas. We've expanded that, and we've expanded that because things like logistics, things like medical networks, so hospitals, even our university and research sectors, we've recognised are being subject to a whole variety of ongoing and persistent cyber-based attacks and compromises. So we haven't been standing still. We've been doing a lot of work in the space. That lends itself quite well, I think, to I guess our ability to continue to contribute to the Quad. We see enormous value in the Quad. As my fellow panellists have discussed, it's something that's founded on shared values. It's founded on a shared interest in the Indo-Pacific, and I think a recognition that economic security and national security are really intertwined. So when I think about it, and Miho discussed the establishment of the senior cyber group under the Quad in September 2021, are sort of the 4 key areas that they're sort of immediately focused on at the moment. Critical infrastructure, cybersecurity, a really good example of a space where we can share knowledge, we can share expertise and experience, and best practice. Supply chain risk management. Again, we through the pandemic experienced all sorts of impacts, as every economy across the world did, to regular, routine access to the things that make economies work and make societies function. That was exacerbated at certain points by cyber-enabled attacks on those systems, and that informed our thinking around the reforms to critical infrastructure protection. Software security more broadly, and again, I think a theme here, which I'll come back to the end, is this is a team sport. So the Australian government can't unilaterally determine that it's going to lift software security standards globally. That's not a thing that we can do. It's certainly a thing that we're well placed to work with partners like Japan, India and the US to promote and to actively promote. And certainly the US here, with some of the executive orders related to certain standards that are necessary for selling into the US government, is a really interesting example, I think, of ways in which there are opportunities for governments to signal what their requirements are and go from there. And workforce development is the fourth element. Again, these are shared challenges that across the Quad countries we're confronting, so really useful and sensible areas, I think, of focus. I just wanted to quickly touch also, I guess, on some of the adjacent areas that the Quad's looking at. As you said, Jeff, and Miho, I think, reflected on too. The Quad itself, it's not just about cybersecurity, it's a range of non-security focused areas that it looks at, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's health response. But the work of the Critical and Emerging Technology Working Group is directly relevant, I think, to the cybersecurity work. It segues neatly. So again, that opportunity to be collaborating across the four countries on those areas of technology where we really need to win and where we benefit from collaborations, whether it's quantum computing, whether it's artificial intelligence, and setting the ground rules, if you'd like. So again, one of the things that the Quad can do is it can really openly articulate the benefit and the need for open, transparent development of technology, and technology which is underpinned by the sorts of values that countries like the four in the Quad care about and seek to uphold. I think the Quad's looking at some really interesting work in telecommunications diversification, the 5G space. Open radio access networks is an area of, I think, interesting focus and interesting opportunity. So how do we create, again, sort of tied to that open, reliable, trusted, transparent technology availability, what are the various ways in which governments can support further investment and really catalyse market investment and industry engagement, because that's the other element here, right? So this is very much a team sport. It's a team sport across the Quad, but more broadly, it's a team sport with business, with the community, with industry. So we had in December in Sydney last year, I think the Quad hosted the first of the business and investment forums. I would expect that to pick up pace. I think the next one is slated to occur in the US. It was about bringing together folks who know more about the things that drive industry decision making than I do. I'm an official. I like to think I'm okay at it. I'm not necessarily the person, though, that should be determining what company X or company Y invests in and how it gets there. So I think there's some really important opportunities within the Quad to drive, I think, both economic security and economic benefit, but which really underpins national security, if you'd like, for us moving forward. I'll stop there. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here today. I'd be remiss if I didn't thank the Heritage Foundation in Pepperdine, an absolutely amazing place to host a 1.5-day conference. To my fellow panelists, it's been great to get to know you and to share our experiences. So if I might maybe just share 4 or 5 items with you. I couldn't help but notice this morning on the way in that in the other not as impactful international forum meeting going across in Davos, they're talking about collective action, constructive dialogue, and public-private cooperation in an uncertain and fragmented world. And it's good that people are talking about that, but uncertainty and fragmentation is happening in cyberspace at a pace and at a scale which is difficult to conceive, much less understand and to put into context. So the fact that we're talking about that with like-minded communities and countries and an engaged audience is phenomenal, so thank you. I think cybersecurity is appropriate, and I think it's important maybe to think about cybersecurity because we have cyberspace. The Department of Defense in the United States recognized that as a 5th maneuver dimension or warfighting domain in the 2009-2010 period, even though many practitioners in this space would have thought that whatever cyberspace was called, it's been around a long time. And military operations at scale, from planning through execution to sustained campaigns, is fundamentally impossible without assured access to cyberspace. So I think there's a technology ecosystem component, and the Quad is bound up in that as advanced representative democracies thinking about how to maintain and secure national security and economic prosperity. I think there's also a very, sometimes or often overlooked, people or human-oriented decision-making environment about cyberspace. And it's those two things together, a combination of technology and a combination of people who use that technology and to do things with data to make decisions. I think that's the thing that we're trying to assure and protect and safeguard, and that is the thing that is at risk. I was interested to note that everyone up on the panel today talked in some context about how their nations are developing and introducing strategies. And I think that's very important, because strategies exist because something is consequential in terms of a time horizon or an event horizon. And that is where we all find ourselves in cyberspace and cybersecurity. Highly eventful. It is in the present, and it's going to persist into the future, and it is absolutely of arguably grave consequence as a matter of national perspective and then shared perspective. I think the Quad can improve and benefit on a number of vectors or attributes. Number one, all of our countries, in my view and in my experience at sea, operating specifically with all of our respective navies and militaries generally, and then in sort of relative national security enterprises and intelligence cooperation sharing arrangements, wonderful partnerships. As is mentioned, we have shared interests, we have shared values, and we also have some shared problems. And it's very easy for us to talk about threats that come from countries like Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea, and that's absolutely true. But there's a whole bunch of global concern with things like criminal activity, other cross-border operations, and so on. I think we also have a shared interest for our own national security and economic prosperity, and together, all four of us and other friends and partners and allies around the world would say that we will be more secure and more prosperous if we are together and if we are synchronized and we capitalize on those shared connections. And I think we also have a fundamental respect for sovereignty, independence, resilience, and readiness. You know, we see those terms, I'm very comfortable with those in the context of a military application, but I think if you're an IR theorist, if you're a technologist, if you're an engineer, if you're a practitioner in our system at the state, local, federal level, you should see yourselves in that context about why cybersecurity and cyberspace is important to the nation. And then I would say, kind of wrapping up, my interest is mostly coming out of the defense sector and as a sailor in the Joint Force, right? And I think that our respective four countries are increasingly better together in a number of contexts. One, I think we value planning, campaigning, and assessment. That is both from a creative innovation standpoint, but also from a critical review, and not kidding ourselves about how well we're doing or being honest with ourselves about how poorly we are doing. I think the second thing is all four of our nations, in my view, value and maintain a professional military arts and sciences approach to national defense, respective defense. I think we would all say we can't be a credible military and operate on the global stage and be a good partner if we didn't understand our dependency on our respective defense industrial base and how that probably means in a globalized economy, we need to be better defenders and integrated partners in the business world as well. And I think the Quad can advance that. That doesn't mean that we give over those things that are of our own sovereign interests, but it means we actively pursue and cultivate and curate opportunities to be together because it's efficient and it makes sense. And I think lastly, I grew up in a world where it was thinking about this term C5 ISRT. That's the whole chain: command, control, communications, computers, and cyber, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. All of that is about what the military must do if all the other things fail in our community of nations. And doing that well can only be done in cyberspace. Okay, and then last I would say, the answers are not going to be found here. The answers will be found here and with the group that has, I believe, those shared values and interests trying to solve the same problem. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you to all of our speakers for some very comprehensive remarks. I do want to turn to the audience for Q&A, but I thought first I would ask, one of the aspects of the private discussion yesterday that I found very fascinating was lessons learned from the Ukraine conflict in the cybersecurity realm. We may be limited in what everyone can say in a public format, but I wanted to give our panelists the opportunity to reflect on that. And if you do have any thoughts you wanted to share with this group, what have we learned from the cybersecurity operations on both sides in the Russia-Ukraine conflict?
Jeff, there are good learnings also. Number of learnings there. I will just list 2 learnings there. We all countries try to localize the data, and we have evolved a concept of a BCP, Business Continuity Planning and Disaster Center, the disaster recovery and the data center. That kind of a concept we have done. Yesterday we had a Microsoft person there. She talked about how the cloud helped with things. Now, imagine a situation where a country attacks another country. What is the point having a localized data? Data has to go out, the entire country was under attack. So the basic concept of localization and the BCP and DCDR putting in a certain seismic zone, that has the learning that what happened in such a disaster situation there. That's one learning. That's for the country. The second aspect is that the mutual cooperation is very, very important among the countries, like-minded countries, because in such disaster, they are only going to come and help you and to recover from such kind of a disaster incident. The third is very, very important to me is that we started negotiating the norms of behavior right from 2001 there. I mean, almost 25, 26 countries used to sit down for almost a month together. By somehow we came to certain kind of agreement and very limited on a capacity development by the 2018 or 2017 there. Now in 2019, there's something unique happened that the UN created a open-ended group as well as the another group which is negotiating and bringing certain norms of behavior. The Russia-Ukraine war, I don't know, whatever the agreement we reached in the UN GGE government group of experts there, what will happen to that understanding, because whether you have a China or a Russia, I think their whole scenario has changed. It's going to be a different scenario. I think that we spent almost 18 years to come to some little bit understanding touch there, and that understanding has gone back there. I think that is where I find a lot of issues and challenges, and I feel that the Quad can play a very, very effective role by virtue of the thing I've said, that we contribute more than 40% of the economy and like-minded people, I think, and we can bring a lot of other people there. But these learnings are there, that we need to sit down and bring more homogeneity rather than heterogeneity in the system. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else want to comment?
Yeah, maybe 2 things come to mind. Initially, I would say we all understand February 2022, right? That's when the very observable maneuver operation started cross-border between Russia and Ukraine. I think one of the things that we continue to learn, but we've observed often, is that cyber operations started well to the left of those maneuver operations in the Ukraine, certainly years and potentially a decade before what we saw unfold in February. So I think it's important just to understand that it takes a lot of effort and committed resolve to undertake, plan, and sustain the cyber operations. It is non-trivial. It takes a lot of effort. And I think we're going to continue to learn what the impact is and what the level of effort is. I think the second thing we could observe is that the commercial sector and private industry are emerging as cyber powers in their own right. And this is something I think that governments and the international community is going to have to get, they're going to have to get sorted. They're going to have to get a better sense of it and understanding of it and actively cultivate and curate relationships to take advantage and harness that very, very capable emerging cyber power. And I would observe perhaps that when looking at very fast-moving, very deep, consequential problems in cyberspace, scalable solutions will only be found in partnership with the private sector, industry, and academia.
Sure. Thank you. So if I may, I'd like to piggyback on what Admiral White just said. So I think that one of the lessons we are learning from this ongoing war in Ukraine is the importance of global public-private partnerships. Why? Because the government and the industry have different sets of insights in what's happening in cyberspace. So we can enrich our insights together through the collective defense and collective wisdoms through sharing the cyber threat intelligence. And also, because cyber domain is the really unique because it's consisting of artificial equipment, like networks and computers and phones. So we have to have help from the industry because industry is a source of innovations. So unless we can have support from services and products from the industries to help the resiliency of our digital infrastructure, it's impossible to ensure the cybersecurity of our critical infrastructure. So that's why I think that Ukrainians have been doing amazing jobs to have the global public-private partnerships to do our cybersecurity.
Thank you. Patrick, did you want to pitch in or take a pass?
I'll take a pass.
Okay. Happy to take questions from the audience. Don't be shy. Thanks for kicking us off again.
Is this on? Oh, there it goes. I'll reintroduce myself. I'm Bradley Combest, second-year graduate student with the Master's MPPs. And I guess my question is for Vice Admiral White, but I would love to know if anybody else had thoughts on it. Admiral White, you described the cyber domain as a kind of fifth domain of warfare, or perhaps, yeah, I think it was you. And so we've had lots of cyber attacks, so why, I guess, then don't we as a nation treat those as kind of traditional warfare types of attacks? We kind of let it go. Is it because it exists kind of in the abstract and there are no real casualties, or is it because it's looked at more as traditional espionage, or is there, and also, is it something else, and is there a point, is there a line where perhaps if there's an attack on something very specific that would trigger a more traditional warfare type of response?
Yeah, so that's a very good question. And I probably at this point in my post-Navy and military career should have a much more polished answer for that. Yeah, so why the fifth domain or dimension of warfare, right? So domain, so air, land, sea, space, and now cyberspace in 2010. So that's the origin story of why it's the fifth one. At this juncture, I don't know what the sixth will be, if there's ever going to be a sixth, but you know, if we'll cross that when we get there. That'll be an investment opportunity for someone, no doubt. What is an attack in cyberspace, right? So there's an entire system inside all of our respective governments and international law, custom, treaty, convention about what an attack is, what an armed attack is, and what rises to the level or the threshold of armed attack, right? And there are better professionals that could talk to you in much more depth about that, but it is prescribed and it is agreed. And I think that part of the conversation that goes on now in governments is what is happening, how do we characterize, how do we understand, how do we attribute, and what does it all mean? I think the fundamental reality is, and we were having a conversation yesterday about some recent events, and you know, Sony comes to mind in, I think, 2014. That was characterized as, you know, that was a nation-state attack on a private company where destruction occurred, right? But for choices that are domestic political choices, you know, it was the U.S. government in that juncture chose to treat it in a different way. nations will always reserve their sovereign ability to decide things in their interest at the time and place. I think more and more is coming. I think it will have more and more consequence and scale, and I think more and more people will be affected. And so I think the Heritage Foundation, graduate students will be wrestling with this for a while and a long time. The important thing is to try to be very, very deliberate and to think now about what prescribed or likely actions will be. I think one of the things that the Quad can do is have their own conversations in public to a degree, but most emphatically privately at the ministerial level, so that they can agree what the norms will be, and to try to posture each country so it's less about response, right, and more about resilience. And I think in order to do that, you're going to have to be very, very proactive in national postures.
Let me add to what he has said, Admiral has said. He said the fifth domain. I must say that all the rest of the four domains which he mentioned, they are natural domains. Cyber is an artificial domain, which we have created the domains, and that domain is becoming more and more complex. I don't know what kind of a software you're downloading, what kind of hardware you're doing it, what kind of things I'm doing it, applications are running there. They're all, nothing is secure. Any application is as vulnerable as any other applications there. Now this domain has a particular characteristics, is that the effects are cascading. The entire nations can be impacted. If you look at the natural domain, those four domains, there will be certain area will be impacted there by any incident there, not the entire nation or maybe the entire region there. But that's the importance of this domain, and that's why the issues are more, because technology is changing, disruptive technologies are coming, and the impact is very devastating, cascading effect.
Thank you very much. Quantum computing, what effect will that have on cybersecurity? And when we talk about events and time, do we have, and you don't have to give us the exact timeline, but do we have a sense of that timeline and how to prepare for that in a way as deterrence? Because if we are constantly reacting, that's not a good strategy.
Patrick, over to you. Yeah, so actually, everyone at the table probably has an equally informed or credible opinion. Quantum computing will absolutely have an impact on and to cybersecurity. That's what the computer scientists tell us. That's what the electrical engineers inform us. That's what the physics suggests. And that's what the math will reveal. And so I think there's a whole bunch of work that's being undertaken at respective national levels to understand things like quantum resistant cryptography, and all of that is also mathematically provable. And so we're in a bit of a race condition. And I think that's just fundamentally it. It is one of the several challenges I think that are confronting all of us. I had an interesting conversation with a colleague last night at dinner talking about some of those things that are genuine national security challenges. And in this country, I heard it referred to as K through 16 education. I'm happy to give props to Dr. Skinner for that. I hadn't thought of it in that context. But when you talk about human capital and workforce development, right, sustainable, rapid ideation, and then invention, and then scalable solutions in cyberspace is going to come from people, right? And all of our respective nations will need people that are, well educated and empowered to pursue these very, very difficult solutions. But quantum is legit. It is a real deal, and this is why cooperation among nations that have shared values will be really, really important to get there first.
So to your point, at least over the last 2 years, we've seen reports that some countries already started to do data harvesting by cyber espionage, because they know that quantum computing is coming. So they are doing the data harvesting in the hope that they can take advantage of the power of quantum computing to decrypt classified data in coming years. So what we need to do is not only to investing in the development of quantum computing, but also we have to invest in a good cryptography, including the post-quantum computing, post-quantum cryptography. And all the Quad members are doing amazing jobs about the balancing between the quantum technologies. So that's another area, although we didn't discuss during these discussions, that we have to help each other to do a better job about protecting our data.
Got time for one or two more?
Ed Reynolds, local. We talked this morning about the apps, but nobody talked about the cloud and the vulnerabilities of the cloud, Zoom, Dropbox, et cetera. What are we doing? Because those cut across the Quad, cuts across the world. And if you could comment on how we're protecting cloud storage of information.
You see, if you look at the cloud there, most of the cloud companies are one of the Quad partner there. That's there. So a proper framework, proper kind of a system certainly will help in enhancing the resiliency of the cloud system there. There are pros and cons there. I mean, we heard yesterday from the Azure representative that they are better equipped to handle the incident or the breaches there, or to mitigate those kind of issues there, vulnerability issue also, rather than instead of your individual hosting the data centers and their problems are there. So I think, I mean, she was right yesterday what she said, the cloud is better, not only from the security point of view, but also from the manageability and the usage point of view also. There are issues, there is no 100% security. We can only go for enhancing resiliency there. And I'm sure as we go on more and more better kind of a technology, more awareness and more understanding among each other there, the security of the cloud computing will be enhanced. I have no doubt about it. We have no other option but to enhance the resiliency of the system on a very periodical, regular basis there.
If I could just add, issues to do with data security and data security standards are very, very important. And I think an area where, whether through the Quad or through other multilateral gatherings of like-minded countries, I think it's fundamentally important that we take some steps to shape international standard setting on data security standards. So certainly within the Australian context, we've been looking closely at that. But they're not sort of set and forget issues. And I think it's a really good example of, I think, an issue which internationally, countries like the Quad nations and others need to have a seat at the table and need to be heavily involved in setting standards for data more broadly.
Do we have a final question?
Oh, I'll do it. Go ahead. I already asked one, so if you'd like to ask.
We can take two.
Hi, my name is Bob Donovan. This is for the Admiral. Admiral, since it's your background, the military, all military assets have some sort of platform. The platform for this, for all data, are satellites. And is that not why the Air Force had created the Space Force? Because when war goes into space, somebody has to be there?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So I think the platform for the global internet is a wide number of things, right? So I would talk about that. Anything that pushes a plus or minus voltage or a photon of light down a glass cable or modulated spectrum, right? So satellites are a very large component of that. At scale, though, I would say the largest chunk of the global internet is terrestrial infrastructure. So undersea cables, and terrestrial infrastructure that every country owns and operates and maintains. I do think I've heard space referred to as sort of, the high ground. And in a military context, high ground is typically consequential, strategic, tactically valuable, and relevant. But it's also increasingly contested, right? So there's been a number of congressional testimonies over the last year or three that talk about operations that are ongoing in space and why space is relevant. It's real, it's vital, it's going to be important to our national security from a communications and a sensing and warning standpoint, but it's also fragile and it's contested. And so I think that's one of the origin stories and conditions for the establishment of the United States Space Force. And so it's good.
So yesterday, Vice Admiral White, you talked a lot about the logistical restraints that the U.S. faces if there were to be some type of action in, say, the South China Sea or with Taiwan. So what are some proactive steps that the Quad can take now to kind of prepare for actions that might take place and just those logistical nightmares that the United States faces that some of these other Quad partners might be able to sort of assist in?
Yeah, so that's a really good question, right? So you always want to be careful about talking about the sort of vulnerabilities, but this is something that's readily known, right? In order to go someplace in a global context, you're going to have to commit the time to overcome distance, and then you have to commit logistic sustainment and resources to stay there and to do your operations there. So all of our Quad partners in the context of a hypothetical future conflict in the Western Pacific are all actually better positioned, more closely positioned to facilitate and enable sustained operations, in that scenario. So I think first and foremost, one of the things that happens is you always have a conversation with respective military partners, intelligence partners, and governmental partners about just what each nation can do and is prepared to do. I think a lot of that is sustained relationships. In the United States Navy, we would do regular and routine port visits in all of the Quad countries. That begins a process, that sustains the process, and that builds confidence going forward. I also think unilateral, bilateral, and multilateral exercises that we all do with each other is very, very important. But I think kind of, that's if it all goes sideways, right? That you need that stuff. What I think the Quad can really do now, and I think what organizations like Heritage Foundation and others can do, is sort of deeply think about how you can solve these shared problems with manufacturing, supply chain issues. How do you rapidly assemble, adhere, and put together and produce, kind of fundamentally war stocks, munitions, infrastructure, and throughput. And I think there's real opportunity in the Quad to contribute to that.
All right, well, with that, I think we have concluded our program. I want to take the opportunity again to thank Dean Peterson for hosting us here, to thank Dr. Skinner for her leadership in organizing this conference. Thank you all for taking time out of your day to join us, and especially a big thank you to our Quad panelists, Admiral White, Patrick, Miho, Dr. Rai. Let's give everybody a round of applause.